Okay, so let's start with the implementation of the authentication flow in React Native. So I'm using React Native CLI and React Navigation. So what do I mean by flow is how do we manage states, how do we sign in, how do we see whether we are loading or not, what do we show when we are loading. Let's say we have three screens in our app: login, home and detail. So home and detail are basically our main app, and this is related to only authentication. So let's say we have a stack, simple stack. We have three screens. When I log in, I would be, let's say, redirected myself to the home screen. So I don't want an option on the stack to go back so that I can go back to the login screen user, or by clicking the hardware back button in Android or iOS, whatever. We don't want user to go back to the login screen, of course, because these two should be completely separated. So one way to do this is simply like replace the navigation. Like on the login button, instead of just doing navigation dot navigate to home screen, we can just do navigation dot replace, or there are some other functions also, dispatch, stuff like that. We can just displace it so that we only get, this is our final stack. But let's see how to do this properly using React Navigation and how they recommend it. So let's have three screens: login, home and detail. This is my React Native application running. Let's open the VS Code. This is my main app.tsx. For packages, I just have React Navigation Native, the native stack, and React Native Reanimated that I'll be using. So I'm just saying hello here, right? So let's create a stack. So const stack is equals to create native stack navigator, right? And inside, because now we'll be doing navigations, so let's wrap it up in navigation container. Here we'll have stack. With the stack we created the navigator. Initial route, let's not give anything. Now let's create three screens. Component will be login screen, home screen and detail screen, right? So for now they don't exist, so let's create them. I don't want to return this much, just simple text from React Native saying login screen, right? And similarly we can home screen and detail screen. So currently I go to, whenever I open my app stack.navigator, I go to the login screen, right? Now here what I can do is from login screen, of course, we get this navigation as a prop, and let's say it is any. We can have a button, we can just click on the login and go to the home screen, redirect ourselves to the home screen. That is one way, but then we'll have the back option. If we don't want that, we can fix it by using navigation.replace, so that the first initial route is then the home screen, and then from home screen we can go to the detail screen, stuff like that. But now let's see how to manage this all properly, right? So we'll be using context API as a wrapper. You can always use like global state management solutions like Redux and whatever. Those will be for like huge apps, but as I'm just demonstrating, context API will be good for us. So let's start. Let's remove these screens. I actually have these screens already made up so that we don't spend time there. We have a home screen and we have a detail screen, right? So this is our login screen. We have a home and detail screen as well. On login, I'm actually not redirecting myself there. I'll be using context API for all this. So let's create our initial context, right? Let me just put it down and let's open the source folder. Oh, Android folder is open up for some reason. Source, so context, let's say auth context, right? So in auth context, let's just declare the type first, like auth context type. We'll have, okay, so let's see what we will be doing. So in our React Native application, we'll be checking, first of all, whenever I open the application, I'll be checking that whether I am signed in or not. If I'm signed in, then this is a complete different navigation screen I want, like which will have home screen, detail screen. And another option is if I'm not signed in, I should go to the login screen, right? So when signed in, only this should be in our navigation. When not signed in, only this should be in our navigation. We'll be using context API for this. We'll have four things in the context API basically. Is signed in, which will be telling us, of course, whether that is signed in or not. Loading, like whenever we are checking whether we are signed in or not, or whether we are signing in, whether we are signing out, there will be some loading state. So that can be managed using isLoading and the sign in and sign out functions, right? So let's open the code and let's create this context. So we'll have isLoading as a boolean, is signed in as a boolean. Let's have a sign in function. Let's return promise here, so we can use like async await, right? And let's have a sign out function similarly. Now let's create the context. So it will be auth context is equals to create context. We can import it from React. We can give it a type like auth context or undefined, let's say, and let's put it to, or let's do it as null and then set it to null, right? Now we'll have to create a provider. So export function auth provider. It will take children, and children type is react.react node. It will have the loading state, whatever set is loading. We have two loading states, right? Two states basically, is loading and is signed in. So it will just be a simple state. Let's set it to true initially. Then we'll have use signed in. Now let's create a sign in function, right? Sign in. Let it be async. Although I'm not really implementing, I'll not be hitting the backend API and stuff. I'll just simulate it using a promise, like simulated delay kind of. So let's do a try catch block. So let me simulate a delay to show loading state, right? So await new promise get resolved after 2000 milliseconds, right? And then after it is done, so let's say the sign in, let's sign in as, let's do it something random, right? So that we can get whatever results, different results each time whenever we sign in, whether we are signed in or whether we are not signed in. Now in the catch block, we simply do set is signed in as false, of course. And after all this, async. And we can have a finally to just set the loading state as false, right? Because whenever we sign in, so because there can be multiple things, so first set it as true again, and then after signing, after try catch block, finally will run, and then we'll set it as false. Now similarly, let's have a sign out. Similarly, it will be an async function. Set is loading to true. On sign out, actually I don't want to simulate a delay kind of, because it should be instant only. So we'll just set signed in directly as false, right? We're not trying to do anything here. You can just console.log something went wrong while signing out, and in the finally, of course, we can just do set the is loading to false, right? Now we have do these two things, and we can return auth context from provider here, auth context.provider, so that we can wrap our complete app in this auth provider. So it will be auth context dot provider, and it will just, inside there will be children. Now we need to send the value to this context also. So that value will be, it will have multiple things like is loading, is signed in, sign in function, the sign out function, right? React must be in scope. Okay, just simple ESLint, I think, import React from React, and we are sending these things, right? Now let's also create a custom hook here only, so that, because custom hook plus context API is a good combination, because so that we don't have to import context again, then use context, wrap it in the wrap this auth context in the use context. So we can just simply create a custom hook, do that repetitive thing here only, like use context, because if we don't use this custom hook, we'll have to write this line of code in each and every component, right? And why to do that when we can do it easily and make it more readable as well? So if it context is undefined, then we can just throw new error, use auth must be inside within a use provider, right? And otherwise we can just return the context directly, right? Now okay, so sign in is done, is loading is done, is sign in is done. Now there is actually one more thing that needs to be done, and that is like whenever a user opens the app, we should check, right, that whether he is signed in or not. Because when we open the app and check whether user is signed in or not, if he is signed in, we can just directly send him to the home screen. If he is not signed in, then we will send him to the login screen. From login screen, we can use these functions that we created from the context API, change the is signing, because we'll do conditional rendering of routes that I'll show how we'll be doing it. So we can just create a function here called like check auth state, right? Const check auth state or status. Okay, it will again be an async function. So I'm making this all async so that whenever you really try it out using your own backend API and stuff, so that time of course you will need async because you will be using await most probably. And also here, as I'm simulating something like a delay, so of course I need to make it async. So here again I will have a try catch block. I will be simulating a delay, right? And here instead of simulating a delay, let's try simulating an API call, right? Simulating a delay, set is signed in math.random. And actually when we click on sign in, we don't want it to fail, right? We can just do set is signed in as true, so that shouldn't be a problem. Here whenever I open the app, so what this will do, whenever I open the app, it will check. Now 50% of the time it will not be signed in, 50% of the time it will be signed in. So irrespective to that, we will be sent whether to the home this stack or this stack. They will be a single stack, but just letting you know, we can have different stacks as well, but React navigation documentation like recommends to use a single stack only. Just use conditional rendering, so that I'll be showing you soon. So let us await for simulating a delay, and here in the catch block is signed in will be false, of course. And again we will have a finally, that finally will be set is loading, set is false. Now why I'm not doing set is loading again here, because this will run only once, and initially when the app loads up, use state is already true, so it doesn't matter. And when will this function run, right? How will it run? We need to add a use effect with an empty dependency array, and then just check the authentication status, right? So let's go to this. Now let's go to our own app and let's see how we will be doing things there. So now we have a context API, we have set it up, but how do we have routes relative to that, right? So for that, we have a navigation container, we have our stack navigation there, and now we can use the context like custom hook that we created, use auth, right? This use auth will give us stuff like two main important things that will be used here, because in our here we only want to check what is the state of our app right now. So is signed in and is loading, right? So is signed in, what is it saying? Cannot read properties, is signed in as null. Okay, doesn't matter. Now the thing here will be show a loading state while checking the auth status, right? So if is loading is true or is signed in is equal to null, because initially signed in is null, right? So we can just send text from React Native saying loading. If I go to use auth, I'm returning this. Let me check, why is it complaining? Auth context type, it doesn't exist. What? Auth context type is loading, is signed in, like how does it not exist? Okay, first of all, inside the navigation container, let's do auth provider. Forgot to do that, because only then we'll be able to use stuff like this. But now let's check auth context dot provider value. I am sending everything here. Let's set this to undefined, and let's set this to undefined as well. Use auth must be used within the auth provider. Okay, so let's do one thing. Let's keep our whole navigation somewhere else. So const app navigator equals to, and it will return some stuff. So from app.tsx, let's take this part here, navigation container. Let's import it. Let's take these things there. Create native stack navigator. Let's import it. And what else is needed? This is not needed here. Auth provider. Inside auth provider there will be app navigator. So we can just do export const app navigator from here. Let us import React as well to shut down ESLint. Auth provider, here we can have our basic app navigator, right? So whenever I'm loading state or the isSignedIn is set as null, then I'll show the loading text. So now as you can see in the login screen, whenever our app will open up, this context will load, right? Because this is in the top level. So initially, use effect, it will check the authentication status, it will introduce a delay, and based on this random value, it will either send us to the login screen. It will just set signed in based on this value, true or false. Now, how do we use this signed in to send us to different screens? It is actually very simple. Just use conditional rendering here. So instead of like showing all of those there, we can just use in the app navigator, let's use isSignedIn again, right? And I think let's put this stuff here only. Text should be from React Native, and in our app is very clean. It just have an auth provider and an app navigator. Now based on whether what is the signed in value? If signed in is not true, so if it is false, then we just have to show this screen here, the login screen. Otherwise, if it is true, then let's just introduce a fragment and have these two screens there. So basically, if I am signed in, then show this stack screens, like mount these stack screens inside the navigator. If I'm not signed in, then have the login screen, right? So now when the app will open up, it will set the sign in state. It will update the isSignedIn state, and depending on this state, our app navigator will check what stack screen should I show up. So let's see if it is working or not. So let's close the app. Open the React Native app. You can see loading written there. It is not quite nicely visible, but that is this thing happening, right? So I can wrap it in safe area view. And just do. So if I close the app again, I open the app, I can just see the loading state. This is the when we are checking whether authentication is going or not. And let me tell you what is happening on the login screen. So on the login screen, whenever the handle login is called, right? So we just have a simple button, touchable opacity, on press we call the handle login. Nothing we are doing right now, because you can see nothing will happen, but we need something to happen, right? So we need to log us in. To log us in, we'll just await the sign in function that we created in our context API, because that is our top level thing. It is managing everything that we are doing related to auth. So like use auth, from use auth we have a function called sign in. We can just await this sign in function, and as you know, this sign in function, let's go to this function again. This sign in function is nothing but setting the loading to true, right? It will await when the loading is true. We will see that loading state again because of this app navigator, app navigator, the loading state will get, because it is using the context, this will get re-rendered. isLoading is true, so we will again see the loading part here, and then on signIn it will just await for 2 seconds, so we will see loading for 2 seconds, and that set signIn as true. So when signIn is set as true, again this value changed, so now signIn is true. Now it will send us to the home and details screen. So now let's see how it works. I have added there, let me go to the login screen. I have added the await signIn. So now what I can directly do is I click on login, and you see the loading state, it will be for 2 seconds, and then I'm navigated to the home screen. From home screen I can go to the detail screen. This is a simple stack. As you can see, in app navigator we have 2 screens, home and detail. In home I have added like this some random data and some navigations there, simple. I can just go back directly. You can go to detail page, I can go back using the stack. Now there is nothing here because this stack navigator has only 2 screens right now, because it depends on the signed in value. So let's see again when I open it, because that is random, right? The authentication status checking. So see, this time it sends us to the login screen. Let's try it again, whether it sends us to the home screen or not. Okay, again it sends us to the login screen. Let's try once more. Okay, so you can see that that math.random is working. Of course it is working. So now what we can do is, instead of just having this simple loading text, we can have something nice here. I have created something, and I have not created actually, I just asked ChatGPT to create it using React Native reanimated. So let's open React Native. When we open it, it shows some beautiful loading screens, and then depending on the auth status we go somewhere. We click on login, again beautiful loading screen, and then we go to the home page, right? So this part is done. We added the login functionality, stuff like that, and we can also add something like let's add something like header shown false. So when I'm in the login screen, I don't want to see the header. So let's see what happens. Okay, it again logged me in. Let's try once more. So I don't see the header. So in stack.navigator, I think I have screen options. I can do something like header right. Is there something called header right? Yeah, I can do it. I can just have some text here saying sign out. Let's see whether this works or not. I log in, and now I have something called sign out, right? Let's just change it to a button from React Native, and title prop. Okay, I think how do we use this button? I'm not really sure. Let's see what is needed here now. So title is sign out. So let's const, let's say sign out button equals just this. We need to return from here, right? And the header right can just directly be sign out button, right? So if I log in, I go to the home screen, it has a sign out button there. Now let's add something here like on press. We need to actually sign it out, right? So it will again an async function, and we'll just do await sign out. So where will the sign out come from? It will again come from the use auth, the context API, and this hook, let's just get the values from the context API nicely. So await sign out. So let's do await sign out here. So let's think what will happen. If I go to the sign out function, what it will do is it will set the loading as true, but it will instantly set the sign in as false. So I'm pretty sure we won't see that animated loading screen. Instantly sign in is set as false. When sign in is false, app navigator again sees that okay, sign in is false, so send them to the login screen. This is our stack then. So let's open the app again, React Native, login, and sign out. See, nicely we are signed out. There is no stack because of course this is the only screen. So we have done basic stuff like setting up a context API, using custom hook with the context API, and doing sign in, sign out. Of course, I'm not actually signing in, I'm just awaiting it, simulating it. Basically, you can have your JWT. Let's take the example of JWT. You can have your backend call here, store the access and refresh tokens wherever, like mmkv storage, async storage, wherever you want. And then based on its response, you can set whether sign is true, loading is true, loading false. So stuff like that. Now there is one problem I ran into after I did this. So let's see that problem, what that problem is. Because if you notice right now, we are using context API and custom hook, right? The problem is that hooks can only be called in React functional components. This is what I'm pretty sure this is what it is. So we can't really use hooks in the files which are not React functional components. So let's say I want to sign out from a file, but that is not a functional component. So what will I do? Because my sign out function, it is declared in the context API. The sign out function is here. So I will need to access the custom hook or directly access the context API, the use context hook. So for using hooks, we need React functional components. So that won't be possible. So then what will we do basically? So how to access these things, basically the sign in and sign out, these of course are not needed. How to access these things in places that are not React functional component, because hooks can only be used in function. So let's say what is an example of this. If you've used Axios, so we generally create a separate Axios file. We create a custom Axios instance to make API requests with our own configurations. Like we can set different things whenever we work on Axios. We use like things like base URL, and there is some time duration as well, I think, stuff like that. So there are many things. There are interceptors, request and response interceptors, stuff like that. And let's say we are doing JWT auth only, right? So JWT auth. So now let's say we are doing it in our axios.ts file. This is not a React functional component. We can't use hooks here. So if we can't use hooks, how do I sign out? Because in my axios.ts file, generally what we do is in the response, whenever we get a response interceptor, here what we do is, let's say I got a response, I got 401 and I'm using JWT. So when I get 401 here, what I'll do is I'll try to refresh my token. Now there are two possibilities here. Let's say refresh successful, and the second part will be, let's say my token did not refresh, not refreshed. So if refresh is successful, then we don't need to do anything. We can just again make the call that was made using Axios. We can just redo it. So there's nothing to be done there. But let's say even our refresh token could not refresh the access token, because let's say my refresh token also expired. So what do I do? So of course I have to sign the user out. In this case, sign the user out. But now how do we sign the user out? Because in our design, we are using context API. Sign out function is written in the context API. So how do I sign the user out, right? How do I set these states, update these states so that user can be signed out from a file that is not a React functional component? So we can use an auth service for that. We can create a class like a singleton pattern, and we can just what we can do is we can just put some functions there, like put a reference to the sign out function in our service, so that this service can be called from anywhere, right? So let's see what we will be doing for that. Let's create a service file. Let me open this. So first let me show you what will happen. Instead of an custom Axios file, I have created a demo api.ts. So this is doing nothing. This is just this. I'll tell you what it does. So for the first 3 times, let me open my simulator. If I'm trying to fetch, if I go to the details page, I try to fetch the protected data. When I click on it first time, I got a response. Click on it second time, data again retrieved, data retrieved after refresh. After 3 tries, if I try to fetch the protected data, the refresh token, whatever I have simulated here, it will just say that refresh token, because of stuff like API call count is greater than 3, simulate refresh token expiration after 3 calls. So refresh token expiration is this part, right? try. This will fail. It will go to the catch. Now I want to do something here. Let's say I want to say console.log user should be signed out. User should be signed out now, right? In this case, let me open my terminal. So it was all refreshed, things like that. If I do it again, token refreshed, let's say 3. At the 4th time, authentication failed. User should be signed out now. So at this time, user should be signed out because my refresh token could not be refreshed. Basically, my refresh token was expired, so my access token could not be refreshed. So now I need to sign the user out. So what should I do? As I said, we can create a service for that and just attach this sign out function to that service so that we can call the services sign out function and this will get executed. So loading will be set to true, sign in as false, and we can just, as I said, we'll just be sent to the login screen directly. So let's see. Now in the source folder, let's create a service file, service auth service.ts, right? It will be a class auth service. Let's create a private static instance of type auth service. Now this will be what we need right now, a sign out handler. What this will have is just a promise that we declared previously or null, and initially we can set it to null, right? Okay, a small typo. Now right now we can create a constructor, but we won't need it for anything. This constructor is generally needed, let's say if you are creating a singleton pattern file for an mmkv instance. So in the constructor you can just initialize the instance, stuff like that, but here we don't need anything because we are just simulating stuff here. So let's create a function get instance, right? It will send this, it will return this type of thing if like not auth service dot instance. So if instance does not exist, we can just create a new instance and set it to there, right? And then we'll just return auth service dot instance. So if it does exist, we can just directly return it. If it doesn't exist, we can create one and return it, so that no duplicate, there are no 2 instances in our complete project. So this is what the singleton pattern is basically. Now there is a function that will be needed, that will be, let's say, set sign out handler, right? Because we need to set it to something. So we will get a handler function which will be of the type promise void, right? And here what we'll do is this dot sign out handler, like we have a sign out handler here, right? We will set it to handler so that whenever I call the set sign out handler, this handler function is attached to the sign out handler of my service. So I can just directly use sign out handler. Let's move ahead and then we can see how this works. So let's create a sign out function here for signing it out. So if this dot, if sign out handler exists, right? This one, this sign out handler, if this exists in our service, then we can just do await this dot sign out handler. And this sign out handler is basically the handler that we will get. We will just send this function we have in our context API, this sign out, we will just send it, or we will basically attach it to this sign out handler in our auth, right? So if it does exist, then do this, else if it doesn't exist, you can just do console.log no sign out handler. Of course you can manage errors properly. And then finally we will just export const auth service. So this is how we generally export in singleton, auth service.get instance. We export this so that every time instance is called, if instance was not there, it was called the first time, we will create it. If for the second time it is called, we'll just return what is already present. So nothing duplication. So no duplication is happening, right? So now what we need to do is we need to go to the context, because of course we need to attach it, right? We need to set the sign out handler. So let's go to the context. I open my context. So whenever my app loads up, at that time only we need to attach a listener to the auth service. So auth service dot set sign out handler, and we can set it to an async function This async function is basically doing nothing but calling the sign out present in our context API. So this sign out which is present in our context API, this function is basically calling that. So this is the handler, and this, when we call set sign out, this function is a handler. It goes here, I get the handler, I set it to sign out handler, so that whenever I click sign out from our service, it awaits, it calls this function sign out handler. So basically this function will get called, async this, it will await the sign out, and then sign out will happen. So let's see. So in the demo API, currently what I was doing was, when I was just telling us, right, that console.log user should be signed out, but instead of just console logging it, we'll just do it directly. So auth service dot sign out, we have a function called sign out in the auth service. This is the function. What this will do is, you know already, if sign out handler is present, it will just call the sign out handler, and we should be signed out ideally. So let's see what is happening in our app. Let's open the React Native app. Okay, I went to the login page. Let's try. I didn't go to the login page. Let's try again, because that is random, so it might not send me to the login page. Okay, it's sent. Nice. I log in. If I click sign out here, this is a React function component, so this will work as I've showed you previously also. This works directly. Let's go to the detail page, right? Let's fetch the protected data. After the third time, when I do it for the fourth time, it should sign me out, because that time is what we are simulating our refresh token to not work basically. So fetch first, second, third, fourth. When I do it, I'm just sent back to the login screen. I can't do anything. I just have to close the app. Basically, I can't go back. If I want to do something, I just have to log in again. And now my tokens will be updated in my backend, not in my backend, in my backend also, but in my front end, wherever I'm storing it, like MMKV or React Native Async, right? This sign out also works perfectly. This is just simulation sign out. So this screen which we create, this is called a splash screen. This is what they say it about in the navigation library. So this is created using React Native navigation, reanimated, sorry. And yeah, so this was it related to like how do we handle the authentication in a React Native app in a clean manner. Now in this, one more thing, in app navigator, when I go to this, generally you won't just have a single stack here, right? But most probably in the top level of our app, we don't have multiple screens. We have screens, but we nest them inside. Like this home screen, stack screen, can have a drawer nested inside, can have a tab nested inside, so stuff like that. So ideally from the top level, it would look something like this only. You can also do one more thing, that you can create a navigator here again, like we have a navigator, right? You can create a login navigator, login stack, have a login navigator here, have a home navigator here, but that is not recommended because of the smoothness of the navigation. Because if we are in the same stack, the smoothness of the navigation will be better. So yeah, this was it. And if you have any, if you think I missed something out, or there are some better solutions to do it, please share those. And yeah, thank you.